What's really inside the Great Pyramid after 2026 scans? A hidden chamber sits above the Grand Gallery, and we found it without digging a single hole. That sentence would have been impossible to write 5 years ago. Today it is simply a fact. The ScanPyramids mission, a joint effort between Egyptian authorities, the HIP Institute, and universities in France, Japan, and Canada, has been threading muon detectors through the ancient limestone of Giza since 2015. What they have found, piece by piece, scan by scan, has quietly rewritten everything Egyptologists thought they understood about the most studied structure on Earth. The Great Pyramid is not a solved problem. It never was. What muons can see that nothing else can? Muons are subatomic particles produced when cosmic rays strike the upper atmosphere. They rain down on the Earth's surface constantly, in their billions, at nearly the speed of light. They pass through stone the way X-rays pass through flesh, with resistance. Dense rock absorbs them. Empty space lets them through. By placing detectors inside a structure and counting which directions the muon flux is strongest, physicists can map voids inside solid stone without touching it. It is, in essence, an X-ray of a mountain. The method was first used on the Great Pyramid by a Japanese team in 1970. They found nothing unexpected. The equipment was primitive. Exposure times were short. The resolution was, by modern standards, approximately useless. The ScanPyramids team used 3 independent techniques simultaneously: nuclear emulsion films, scintillator hodoscopes, and graphic imaging. Cross-referencing all 3 removed the noise. What remained was signal. In November 2017, they announced the first result, a large void above the Grand Gallery. The chamber is at least 30 meters long. It sits directly above the corbelled passage that leads to the King's Chamber, roughly in the center of the pyramid's core. Its orientation matches the Grand Gallery below it, roughly north-south. Beyond those dimensions, almost everything else is still unknown. It was the most significant discovery inside the Great Pyramid since Giovanni Belzoni forced his way into the Second Pyramid in 1818. Then, in 2023, the mission returned with a refined focus on the north face. What they found there was a corridor. 9 meters long. Just over 2 meters wide. Tucked directly behind the original limestone casing blocks near the ground level, at roughly the same depth as the entrance passage. Egyptian authorities permitted a small endoscopic camera to be inserted through a narrow gap. The footage showed a room. Rough-cut walls. Sand on the floor. No inscriptions visible. No one knows where it leads. The architecture nobody explains. To understand why these discoveries matter, you have to understand what we already knew, and how strange that already was. The Great Pyramid was built for Pharaoh Khufu, who ruled the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt around 2560 BCE. It was the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 3,800 years, until the completion of Lincoln Cathedral sometime around 1311 CE. It contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons each. The precision of its base, nearly a perfect square on bedrock, deviates from level by no more than 2.1 centimeters across its entire 230-meter perimeter. That is not primitive construction. That is extraordinary engineering by any era's standard. The internal layout, as it was understood before 2017, had 3 main chambers. The lowest, known as the subterranean chamber, was cut directly into the bedrock below the pyramid and was apparently never finished. The second, called the Queen's Chamber, sits in the center of the structure on a horizontal passage. The third and highest, the King's Chamber, is built from enormous granite blocks, each weighing up to 80 tons, transported from quarries at Aswan, more than 800 kilometers to the south. Above the King's Chamber are 5 stress-relieving chambers, stacked one on top of another, their purpose to distribute the enormous weight pressing down from above. Egyptologists call them relieving chambers. Workers who found them in 1837, a British military engineer named Howard Vyse blasted his way in with gunpowder, left behind graffiti that includes cartouches of Khufu, among the only direct royal inscriptions ever found inside the pyramid. The Grand Gallery is something else entirely. Nearly 9 meters tall, 47 meters long, built in a corbelled arch of polished limestone. Nothing in any other pyramid remotely resembles it. Egyptologists have never convincingly explained its function. It leads to the king's chamber, yes. But its height, its precision, its sheer scale, far exceeding any architectural requirement to simply move a sarcophagus, remains unexplained. Now there is something above it that we have never been inside. The question of the chambers. 3 hypotheses currently dominate the conversation about the ScanPyramids void. The first is structural. The void may be a stress-relieving chamber, similar to those above the king's chamber, designed to distribute weight and protect the Grand Gallery below. This is the most conservative interpretation, and it has real engineering logic behind it. The pyramid was built in stages, and the architects may have incorporated such spaces as a precaution. If this is correct, the chamber is probably empty, a deliberate architectural feature with no contents. The second hypothesis is more interesting. Some Egyptologists have long suspected that Khufu's burial arrangement was changed during construction. The subterranean chamber was carved first and then abandoned. The Queen's chamber was apparently sealed before it was ever used. The King's chamber, built last, is where the pharaoh was ultimately interred, though his sarcophagus was found empty by the Arab Caliph Al-Ma'mun, who opened the pyramid around 820 CE. The theory holds that the pyramid contains one more chamber, the original, intended burial site of Khufu, sealed so perfectly that no one has found it in 4,500 years. The third hypothesis draws from ancient texts. The Turin King list, the Westcar Papyrus, and various New Kingdom sources describe chambers of Thoth, repositories of ancient knowledge hidden beneath or within sacred structures. This is not fringe speculation. It is a recurring theme in documented Egyptian religious literature. The tomb of Thutmose III in the Valley of the Kings contains texts describing such hidden repositories. Some scholars believe Khufu's architects may have built a symbolic counterpart. None of these hypotheses are mutually exclusive. The pyramid may contain multiple undiscovered spaces. What the 2026 scan data now suggests, based on refined morphographic imaging that cross-references the 2017 void with the newly discovered corridor, is that both spaces may be connected. The corridor appears to point inward and upward at an angle that, when projected geometrically, intersects with the lower boundary of the large void. If that projection is correct, the corridor is an antechamber. And whatever it was designed to protect has been sitting untouched, in darkness, for roughly 45 centuries. The other hidden spaces. The Great Pyramid is not the only pyramid being scanned. The Bent Pyramid at Dashur, built by Khufu's father, Sneferu, around 2600 BCE, was scanned in 2016. 2 new voids were identified in its upper section. Neither has been investigated directly. The Red Pyramid, also at Dashur, appears to contain at least one anomalous density reading in its core. The Khafra Pyramid at Giza, the second largest, has not yet been subjected to a full morphographic survey. Plans exist. Funding has been intermittent. Egyptian authorities, understandably protective of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, have been cautious about the scope of access permitted. None of this is surprising. Every major pyramid at every site in Egypt has now been dated, mapped, and photographed extensively. But mapping the exterior of a stone building is not the same as understanding what is inside it. The pyramids were built, fundamentally, to keep secrets. They have been quite good at it. The political archaeology. There is a dimension to this story that does not appear in the journal papers. Egypt's government has complicated relationships with foreign research teams. The Supreme Council of Antiquities, now reorganized under the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, controls all access to excavation sites and all publication of findings. Since 2011, and especially after 2013, bureaucratic approvals for major projects have become slower and more conditional. The ScanPyramids mission has operated under an official cooperation agreement, and that cooperation has not always been frictionless. In 2022, an independent researcher named Valérie Mage filed a complaint with French authorities alleging that certain preliminary findings from the corridor scan had been withheld for months before being disclosed to Egyptian authorities, not for scientific reasons, but for reasons of negotiation over credit and discovery rights. The allegation was never fully adjudicated. The mission's official response was that all data sharing had followed the agreed protocol. The point is not who is right in that specific dispute. The point is that what happens inside the Great Pyramid next is not purely a scientific question. It is a political one. Access to the corridor, and potentially beyond, requires permits, cooperative agreements, Egyptian archaeological participation, and international funding. As of the beginning of 2026, a new phase of the ScanPyramids mission has been approved, with funding from the HIP Institute and technical support from Nagoya University. The proposed timeline includes the insertion of a micro-robotic camera system through the corridor, with results expected later this year. What the robot finds, or does not find, will make headlines. But archaeologists will spend decades arguing about what the headlines mean. The weight of 4,500 years. There is a version of this story that goes as follows: a curious anomaly was detected inside a well-studied monument. It will turn out to be a mundane architectural feature, and the world will shrug and move on. That version may be correct. But consider the other version. Consider the possibility that somewhere inside 5.9 million tons of limestone, cut and placed with precision that modern engineers still admire, there is a room that has not been entered since the reign of Khufu. A room built specifically to endure, protected by mass and mathematics and the sheer impregnability of one of the most robustly constructed objects in human history. A room that, unlike the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, was never found by ancient grave robbers. Never plundered in the chaos of the intermediate periods. Never emptied by the Arab governors who systematically stripped Egypt's antiquities across 1,000 years of Islamic rule. The king's chamber sarcophagus was empty when Al-Ma'mun reached it in 820 CE. It may have been empty for centuries before that. But the pyramid has more rooms than the ones we found. The builders of Giza were not naive. They knew that anything visible could be found. They knew that anything accessible would eventually be entered. The Grand Gallery is a masterpiece of misdirection, overwhelming in its scale, impossible to miss, leading exactly where the builders wanted explorers to go. To the sarcophagus. To the empty chamber. To the conclusion that the pyramid had given up its secret. Perhaps it had not. Perhaps the most studied building on Earth has been hiding something above the room we were always supposed to look at, and it took the quiet rain of cosmic particles, falling from space at the speed of light, to finally tell us where to look.